Okay, so welcome to this session, The State of Democracy Today. It's obviously not unrelated to what we've just been talking about, but we just wanted to kind of take a step back, and therefore I'm delighted to have two guests who are just going to kick-start this discussion with 5-minute openers. I'll have a quick chat with them and then over to you again. So we're going to hear from Professor Frank Furedi here, who's an emeritus professor of sociology at the University of Kent, social commentator, author of over 20 books. Two I wanted to draw attention to are How Fear Works, the Culture of Fear in the 21st Century, which in the middle of the coronavirus epidemic, panic, whatever way you want to look at it, might be worth revisiting. But maybe more significantly for this is the author of Populism and the European Culture War, which has led to him speaking all around Europe and becoming one of the foremost voices in terms of understanding how the EU operated as a barrier to democracy and also what populism really means. So can we give Frank a warm welcome, please? And also delighted to have with me Maurice Glasman, Labour peer, Lord Glasman, Labour Life peer, Director of the Common Good Foundation, founder, significantly, it's already had a number of name checks of Blue Labour, and many of the themes that we all went through in relation to the, I don't know if this has gone off now, many of the themes that we all have reflected on, I think, whether it's Red Tory or Blue Labour or whatever way you want to look at it, many of those themes around place, community, somewheres versus anywheres, all of that. I have to say Maurice was ahead of the game. I mean, this was something which he talked about and also got talked about at great cost, issues around immigration, which in terms of the Labour Party obviously got him daubed, all sorts of things which we're now all used to being talked, shouted at, you know, a racist and so on. Nothing could be further from the truth. One of the most important voices, I think, in the UK at the moment. Blue Labour is a conservative form of socialism within the Labour Party. I mean, they need to get out of the bloody Labour Party, that's one thing. Anyway, encourages a return to community values based on trade union, church and voluntary groups, and is the author of Unnecessary Suffering, Managing Market Utopia. Let's give Maurice a warm welcome. Right. Frank, kick us off, please.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me, and I'm delighted to be with such soulmates, you know, people who have a similar heartthrob as I do. And it doesn't really matter where we come from, but I think all of us instinctively understand that there is something in the air. And often we find it very difficult to give that a name, to say this is what it is. Often we find it very difficult to actually accept that it's really happening, isn't just simply a fantasy on our part. But at the same time, we have a lot of very important challenges if we're going to go forward rather than just simply mark time. And my own personal concern, what I like to do before I drop dead, is to help contribute to the building of a more sound, coherent, leftist, populist movement. Something that I think there's a very real appetite for. And everywhere I go in Europe, you'll find that there are people who basically are looking for somebody or looking for a movement that can give them a voice. I think that's really what we're all about. How do we give, not just ourselves, but to other people a voice, so that they can begin to get up and have the confidence to actually say, this is what I think. See, at the moment, and this is one of the big political challenges that we have, there are a lot of people that tell you, you know, Frank, I agree with you, I think this is absolutely right, but you can't say that, can you? I mean, the number of times I hear people saying, you can't say that, as if there is some kind of totalitarian system that's going to imprison us. People don't realize that actually you can say that. You can say that, and the more you say it, the more other people will also rise to the occasion. So to me, the first thing is to create a kind of a dynamic where instead of people being told you cannot say that, we tell them, yes, you can say that. You can absolutely say that, because that's really very, very important. The reason why this is crucial is because in many respects, politics in the UK as elsewhere is ultimately dominated by those people who control the language we use. You know, what are the words you can say and you cannot say? I mean, that's particularly important amongst young people. I mean, if you talk to young people, they're continually censoring themselves. They're continually watching their words. They're not sure how they can communicate to others what's deep in their hearts. So there's, first of all, the question of who's controlling the narrative, and more importantly, how we can be in a position where we can develop a counter-narrative, and where we can begin to give people confidence that there is another language, a language of freedom and democracy that's not somehow crushed by the identity vocabulary that is so heavily promoted in the press, in the media, and in the institutional education, but a different vocabulary that we're proudly and confidently using as an alternative. So I think that's one of the most important things. See, I could talk about PR, getting to the House of Lords, all those things, which I totally believe in. But to get to that point where we can get those kinds of results, we do need to have more people who have confidence in themselves to say what they are really thinking. That's our first job, to activate those people who are already on our side, but at the moment lack the conviction, the confidence to stand up. I think the reason why that's important is because the language we use, the narrative that prevails, ultimately determines the quality of our public life. Now, what is democracy? See, a lot of people have a variety of different interpretations of what democracy is. They talk about majority and democracy. You can have referendums on a more regular basis. You can have representative democracy. But at the end of the day, real democracy, I mean real democracy that is alive, does not depend and is not guaranteed by institutions. You can have the most perfect democratic institutions and still have a very undemocratic political culture, as we had in Britain. And on paper, it looks really good. United States, it looks really, really good. And the reason why you have a kind of anti-democratic or a skepticism towards democracy in the air or in the media is because ultimately the only guarantor of a healthy democratic world is the quality of our citizens. It's the people. When people take themselves seriously and when they feel that they got something to say, they will call out those politicians who are doing the wrong things. It's when people see themselves as citizens, as active, responsible citizens of their community, rather than just merely people that occasionally go to vote, that democratic life comes alive. And one of the things we learn from the experience of history is that people, human beings, even when they think they're democratic, aren't really democratic until they practice democracy. Right? It's through being democratic, it's through becoming active, it's through living the life of a democratic citizen that you and I grow up one day and gain that kind of maturity of what democracy is really all about. And I think that's the challenge that confronts us. It might sound really vague and unclear, but at the end of the day, it's something that we all recognize in our lives, that we need to have more people on our side who themselves are getting out on the streets, are themselves campaigning, and who are taking charge of their community life, not leaving it up to bureaucrats and other individuals that kind of come in there. So for me, that is crucially important. If I had time, I would explain this a little bit more by talking about something that is going on that we don't talk about. And I think, I'm just going to mention that, raise that. And I think that, that is absolutely crucially important, that underpins all this, which is the culture war that is going on. It's about patriotism. It's about family. It's really about who we are as human beings. Ultimately, the question is what's more important, being a citizen of our community, of our nation, or being a member of an identity group? I mean, ultimately, it really comes down to that. And at the end of the day, I think people in this room have already made that choice. And I'm sure that there are millions of others, if they're kind of inspired in the right direction, can also stand up and be counted as genuine members of the nation, genuine patriots who are open to taking control of their destiny. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. It's still morning for me anyway. And
Shout loud.
yeah, I'm a mumbler, so yeah, there's lots of things I could tell you. Yeah, I'm a member of the House of Lords, you know. I'm in the Labour Party, I'm Jewish, you know, there's lots of things going my way. And it's just really lovely to be here. A couple of things, you know, I had a mother once who always impressed these things. I just want to thank Claire and Mo and Heinrich and everybody for the organising of this. And on a more personal note, it's just great that Paul and Debs and Kat are here who kept me company over the interregnum. I mean, but I think we've just got to acknowledge that we've been through a really horrible thing. The incredible intensity of the demonisation of democracy that went on and that we had to engage with, you know, in our families, definitely at work. Certainly, can you imagine, I used to call the House of Lords the Kingdom of Romania, because, and I just used to walk in, and it's an astonishing thing that that democracy can bring this change. So that's what I just wanted to begin about. So we've lived through really 40 years, you can argue about it, 30, 40 years of an era that I would call progressive globalisation. That's the area that we've lived through. You can think of better phrases, but that's the best one for me, and that's the thing that's changed. So, you know, I always say about the thing about progressive, it's the last thing you want to hear when you go to the doctor. You know, and yet there's this assumption, particularly from graduates in the social sciences, that progress is a good thing, that this progressive idea is a really good thing. If you think of progressive rock, you wouldn't say that. But yeah, and if you think about cancer, you wouldn't say that. So why do we have this thing with, you know, progressive politics? And this is what's changed. And I just want to talk about the four pillars, really, of progressive globalisation and how we've moved, because that's what was at stake in this interregnum that we've lived through. And, you know, I'm still left enough to work in that tradition. And I think there's several of us here, but Frank, certainly remembering that there was a previous interregnum in the 70s, that when I grew up, where it was up for grabs, and the left lost that very decisively, and was marooned for many years and never really, I think, retrieved itself. And then this interregnum has been fundamentally lost as well. So I just want to talk about the four pillars, as I see it, of what progressive globalisation was, and then move into the new era. So the first assumption of progressive globalisation is essentially that capitalism is good, that the best system possible is the free movement, unmediated free movement of people, goods, services, and things. That's assumption that that's the most efficient system. The second assumption that's, I think, very important within it is that globalization subordinates politics. So I think that's a very important aspect of it, that there's really not much you can do at the level of the nation state, and therefore that democracy is subordinated to a rights-based legal system that's essentially not generated from within a politics, but generated within a set of international treaties. And so, you know, first of all, there's capitalism, and that's bound with globalization, with technology, that borders don't matter, that they're increasingly irrelevant. And then you move into this a sort of legal system that subordinates the nation state, but also, much more importantly, a rights system that subordinates democracy. And the fourth assumption is the teleological assumption that the future is liberal and the future is middle class, that the best thing that you can do is go to university and agree with everybody. And if you do that, you'll have something called a career, right? And that's the way to go. So essentially, this whole stuff, it drives me nuts. Social mobility, I decided, was a kind of velocity idea of the distance you could move away from your mum. You know, it was a real social mobility. So the ultimate thing was obviously to emigrate. And that was the ultimate form of, like, the political economy, I would say, under New Labour. You know, that was the ultimate goal, was moving away. So there was no sense of place, no critique of capitalism, an idea of the individual outside all relationships as the ultimate form of emancipation and liberation. So I'm just saying that's progressive globalisation, and that is what the liberal ruling class believe. These are the things. So let's have a moment of compassion. It's difficult. But really imagine that the following things are now characteristic of the new era. The first is that the nation state does matter. That it's not just the regional administrator of a global system. The second, and much more worrying thing as well, but it's linked, is that democracy isn't over. Democracy is a power. And the third thing which is linked to that is that the working class are the decisive force in our polity. I'm not saying they're dominant, but if you look at the referendum, if you look across in America at Trump, and then you look at the election, that the working class were the decisive force in the change that has come. I can't believe it. And the fourth thing, which is much more difficult, which I was picking up earlier, an articulation of, is the future is not liberal, the future is conservative. Now, when I say conservative, I don't mean the Conservative Party, I mean an attachment to place, an appreciation of relationships, the obligations of love. All of these things are very real and meaningful to people. So essentially what's happened is that we are in a new era. And what's lovely to be with you is I think that you grasp the possibilities of this new era. Now, everything, therefore, the articulation of a democratic politics, a politics that extends democracy into the economy, is, I think, the space that I really wanted. The restoration of place, of the importance of place, and working within the affections of people. So I'm really into the parish commune, local assemblies, the restoration of the counties. Just to say, anybody here really think that they're from Medway or South Humberside? You know, the way that we've humiliated people with the way that we talk about that. And then we've got to recognise the really crucial thing is that capitalism and capital concentrates every bit as much as the liberal state in terms of power. So there's got to be a redistribution of assets, you know, regional banks. On a final note, Claire, I know I've got the message. I really do. And but, you know, those three things I mentioned earlier, so it's not going to be short. It is really vitally, I would say that a very important thing is to close half the universities and turn them into vocational colleges. You know, really. Because, sorry, I'm so unused to being applauded given my life. I want to go, really, what are you doing?
Wait.
Yeah. So I think that's where do we go is the end of history, Fukuyama, which you mentioned, all of that is incorrect. All through this, we've all been called on the wrong side of history. Have you got this one? Yeah, but we are on the right side of history. We are shaping the future through our politics. Now, it goes without saying that the Labour Party is marooned indefinitely in the previous era. It can't think outside of globalisation, capitalism, liberalism, individualism. And the working class have decisively shifted their affections and their loyalties. But I do want to say that within the history of Labour, within the Labour tradition itself, lies the keys also to the future. So thank you.
We're talking about the state of democracy. I think we really need to understand the depth of the problem. And so to do that, I don't think we can avoid talking about the Trilateral Commission. Trilateral Commission set up in the 70s. The aim is to undermine democracy across Europe, Asia and America. They have been working by concerted effort to do that, ideologically capture the unions, the universities. One of their missions is to indoctrinate youth. And I don't think that it is a massive coincidence that the EU's principles of globalisation, promotion of global capital, undermining of democracy, fundamentally undemocratic institutions also aligns with the Trilateral Commission. Or that the EU has put a lot of funding into UK universities in terms of researching postmodernist theories, queer theory, and promoting those kind of identity politics values, which are now absolutely pervasive in every single British institution. They are behind what happened to Harry Miller with the police, where they're checking your thinking. I think it runs really, really deep. It is one thing that unites the powerful across the right and the left institutions, because the Labour Party is about to elect Keir Starmer. He is a member of the Trilateral Commission.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, sorry, yes.
No, that's
I was a teacher, it works. Right, carry on.
I'm a teacher as well. Alka Segal Cuthbert. I'm politically, formerly RCP, and more recently Brexit Party candidate, MEP candidate, and candidate in East Ham. I think without freedom of speech is crucial, because without that, I don't think we're going to be able to address the problem of citizenship, which is what I wanted to ask about, because it is something that I have been really rather, it touches me personally, I suppose, as a daughter of an immigrant family that came to Britain in the 60s. And it's the thing that you said, Frank, you said, well, you know, it has to be earned, so you do what you have to do to become a citizen. And it's that do what you have to do to become a citizen that I think we need to think about and discuss, because, well, I mean, I agree with that kind of theoretically, but what I'm concerned about is that if it's something that's earned and then it's granted, can it then be taken away? Because post Shamima Begum and the recent deportations, I actually feel really rather worried about that, because is that something, who has to earn it? If you're white and you're born here, you don't have to earn it, it seems to me. And then I know that, I've got this other way round, but there's a cultural dimension and a political dimension to citizenship. You need both. But do we need to prioritise one? Do we need to give more weight to one? Because I know when my family came here, my family did not like Britain politically. They were come from a quit India stuff in India, but culturally they really loved Britain and supported its values. But that was a time of shared value consensus. So could either of you say something more about that?
Okay, thank you. You speak.
Right,
you speak.
okay.
Sorry.
I'm Roger Townsend, PhD in International Relations. I'm happy to call myself a national populist. My question is, can there be an alliance of the anti-establishment, anti-system forces, an alliance between the anti-system right and the anti-system left? Now, I'm happy to reach out to the left on anti-globalisation, on protectionism, economic intervention in the economy. On that, we've got common ground there. And on the right, on the economic right, shall we say, or the libertarian right, I certainly can reach out and have common ground on the social libertarian aspects of things, free speech, obviously. But I do have a bit of a problem with economic libertarianism, which is really too capitalist, too establishment. They even go to abolishing the state, some of the extreme ones of those. So on an optimistic note, I think it can be done amongst voters, and it has been done outside of Britain. In Italy, briefly, for 1 year, there was an alliance between the Five Star Movement, which is usually characterized as a left-wing anti-establishment party, and on the right with the La Liga, which is a more right-wing anti-establishment party. It can be done with voters. Can the leadership of the revolution, though, reach out without getting into a left-right battle and saying, we don't like Reds, we don't like nationalists, they're racists?
My name is Matt Mickler. I was the parliamentary candidate for Salford and Eccles for the Brexit Party. I just want to talk briefly about the community of hate that you mentioned, also freedom of speech. What I found and what I noticed specifically about the Labour Party is they like to try and put me in a box. They thought I'd come from a specific background. I was this middle-class, right-wing, Farage-obsessed type of individual, which I wasn't. I came from a working-class Jewish family, and the sort of community of hate that I experienced from specifically the Labour Party was disgusting, specifically online. A little bit irrelevant, but I actually did some musical theatre, and I don't know if you've heard the show called The Producers. Somebody from a Labour councillor found a picture of me dressed up as a character from this German musical, and assumed that I was Springtime for Hitler. I assumed I was a right-wing, nut job, etc. So that's why you've joined the Brexit Party. He said no, etc. The sort of a hate that I experienced, not only towards the Brexit Party, but also the likes of Leslie and Mark from the wonderful Green Leaves organisation, but the SDP. I had very good relationships with the Liberal Democrat candidate and also the Green candidate. And the hate they got, there's a difference between freedom of speech and actually trying to put somebody in a box. And I stuck out like a sore thumb when they realised that I was not this type of person. I shared a lot of similar ideology to the likes of Claire. I stuck out like a pork sausage at a bar mitzvah. They really, really didn't like the fact that I was not the way they thought I was. And over the months that I went round Salford, I was talking about Peter Shaw and Barbara Castle, how the sort of original working class Brexiteers were the Labour Party. And it's only until the likes of Tony Blair came along that actually transferred the ideology, and they all became very neoliberal. So that's what I just really want to talk about, and thank you very much.
Thank you. That's brilliant.
I just wanted to go back and ask for some clarification on the point about citizenship, because it strikes me that the government authorities are also obsessed with concerns about citizenship, which is why they have citizenship classes at schools. And yet the content of those classes, from what I can gather from my daughter who attends them, is that to be a good citizen, you have to protect people's identities. And to protect people's identities, you have to go to the school counsellor if you find out anything's gone wrong. And then the school, if not the school counsellor, you have to go to the school police officer who is in residence at the school. And so it strikes me that when you talk about the content of citizenship, there's actually a very different content given to citizenship to our young people than the content I would like to see citizenship have. So how do we address that?
Okay, thank you. Frank, anything you want to pick up?
On free speech, I had this experience where, I'm a free speech absolutist, from Tommy Robinson to anybody. And I even defended the right of free speech of George Galloway, a man I really hate profoundly. And then to test me on this, George took me to the libel court on the grounds of what I said about him was libelous. And I was forced to pay him £4,000 because I didn't want to lose my house. And that was a very good lesson for me. That, sometimes when you believe in free speech, it blows back on your face. But that's not an argument against free speech. That's an argument for even more free speech. That's to say, get rid of the libel laws altogether. I really agree with the guy over there about how you bring people together. And my formula in my own head is there are three things that most of us share to a greater or lesser extent. I think most of us are a little bit on the social traditionalist side when it comes to family, community, personal life. In other words, we have what's sometimes wrongly called social conservatism. But what it really is that you take seriously your relationships, you take your past seriously, you got a connection that you kind of cherish and you nurture. So I think that's one aspect of it. I think most of us are socially liberal in the sense that I think we believe in free speech. We don't judge people in terms of we judge them, but we allow them to behave and live in accordance with their preferences. I don't care what you do. I might not think very much of it, but as long as I think it's important for us to be open-minded in the way that other people lead their lives, whilst us having strong opinions about what is right and wrong. And then finally, in economic matters, I think it's quite important to take the tradition of the welfare state in its proper sense, not in this bureaucratized deformity, quite seriously. In a civilized society, we need to provide people with the resources they need, in education, health, and all the rest of that. And if you can weave these three things together, which often seem to be from very different political traditions, both being libertarian, both being conservative, also being socialist, then I think you can come up with a formula that most human beings, most people that I encounter, actually, sort of respond positively to.
In relation to what Kat was saying, which is right, the Trilateral Commission and Michael Crozier and Huntington and all of that lot, that was the previous interregnum that ended up with Thatcherism. That the unions had to be broken, there was a crisis of democracy. What's really interesting is that they lost this time. So I'm just sharing that the space is open for us. They really don't know what to do because of the limits of their progressive mind, Claire. They can't get it. And then moving on with that, just very briefly, I hate to break the news, but we're actually not citizens, we're subjects, just to let you all know. And this whole concept of citizenship, as it's been drafted into schools, is therefore not about what citizenship is about. It's a concept that was rooted in cities, just giving you the etymology of the city. It wasn't a Buddhist thing, city Zen. And it was about power. And it was about the assertion of power and the legitimacy and the participation of different groups in city government. So it's an incredibly vacuous and superficial thing that should in fact be called liberalism. I'm just saying that that's what citizenship means, not being mean to people, being careful what you say, essentially. That's how it goes in schools, and being very afraid of populists and not being. There's a very strong ideology, and within just the beginning of the conversation, but within England and the English tradition, it was a birthright. Voting, freedom of speech. It was an inheritance. The freeborn English did. You cannot tell me what to do because. So the key is how do we pass on this inheritance of liberty and democracy that is embodied uniquely in this country. That's that, and how to do that without being, and that goes to the thing. I know the hate. I'm only asking you to know. I didn't dress up as one of the sort of dancers in Springtime for Hitler, but I know exactly what you're talking about, and it is quite intense, progressive hate. So one of the things to bear in mind that helps me through it is because they're all really, really good people, how can they be hateful, right? So there's no constraints on their hate. They can't control themselves. They are haters, but they're not the haters. So it's planet fuck, where up is down and right is wrong and good is bad. That's the planet that the Labour leadership contest is going in, and that's the world they live in. So just to share with you, to end a couple of rules, there is no one sort of more exclusive than those who believe in inclusivity. That's a very good rule. No one who believes more in the imposition of homogeneity than people who believe in diversity. You've just got to get it's the opposite. They live in a world where they are absolutely morally virtuous and we are fallen. So I just take it as a state of grace.
Right, okay.
All in all.
In support of Frank's point that you can say that, I'm Harley, I work in education publishing, as PC as you can get. A few years ago I got a speaker in to talk about the history of Black History Month. Did a really brilliant but controversial speech where she ended up saying that Black History Month had done more harm than good. It's heresy in education world. Total silence when it came to the discussion. I thought I was going to get a sack. It took one person in the audience to say, well, yeah, actually, I agree. And it was like the dam broke. One by one, people started coming out saying what they thought as well. Brilliant. And for the rest of the day, there was this atmosphere, beautiful atmosphere, where people felt like they'd be given permission to breathe. So it can be done. It can be a bit nerve-wracking, but it can be done.
Okay. I'm a social democrat from Liverpool, and unlike the majority of the people in my city, I voted to leave, like the majority of the people here. I'm just wondering, a lot of people here seem to like referenda, direct democracy, but I'm scared that it will infringe upon communities. A lot of people in my city are quite annoyed because the Labour Party is on its knees and the Tories, in their mind, will just manage to decline. So how do we prevent referenda from infringing on the community?
Unlike most people in this room, it seems, I just want to say I've never stood for public office anywhere, but for my sins I am an academic, and so I've I've come across a lot of the kind of silencing, and I voted Leave, so I wasn't very popular and everything. But the point I want to make is related to that, in that when we talk on the cultural terrain, it seems that things become a bit ossified or set in stone, and that maybe we need to shake that up a little bit and shift more to a kind of more fluid political discussion. So, you know, your stereotypes of your Hitler in springtime thing, that was, you know, that really kind of spoke to me in the sense of having these boxes that you're put in this kind of culture wars. And in relation to free speech, I've been reading and thinking a lot about Selina Todd this week. She's an Oxford academic, and she has been no platformed for saying that women are women, which seems to me a fairly uncontroversial statement. But the point is, though, in relation to the introduction that Frank gave about free speech, is that Selina Todd isn't one of the voiceless. She's very confident and able to defend her position, but she's still been silenced. Like today, she was supposed to be speaking at a conference which was registering the 50th anniversary of the women's movement, and she's been no platformed from that at Oxford. So, you know, I don't think it is just a matter of needing a bit more confidence to speak up. I think the problems that we're facing in terms of free speech are much bigger than that, and we need to challenge it. And I think one way we need to challenge it is moving away from those kind of the cultural terrain and onto the more fluid political one, and talking about ideas for their own sake, not as a reflection of who you are.
One thing I think I noticed in the last period was our own politicians did not have to listen to us or get into any real conversations with us by using the EU. They could effectively bypass us and sidestep us. They could bring in policies sideways, so to speak, without having to kind of dirty their hands with us. And if one thing comes out of today for me, I would hope that it is that we can find new ways of reminding them just how serious we can be, and how in many ways we are probably more imaginative and creative and more visionary than they could ever be.
Maurice, your final 1 minute thought, please.
Yeah, I'm just inspired by today and the things about citizenship and accountability, which I think democracy and accountability is the crucial thing. Yeah. How about bringing back, in ancient Rome, you know, for the plebs, they had these things called tribunes, right? And essentially it was a bit like our system in that the working class didn't have the vote, and essentially you were ruled by the senators and the aristocracy. But in the tribunes, they had a system of appointments, so people actually voted on who was head of their local authority, you know, who was going to be not the authority but head of the prison, head of the institutions. I think that a really important thing that we can push for is to establish tribunes for the appointment of head teachers, vice chancellors of universities, actually make it open to a democratic assembly. And I think through democracy we'll deal with a lot of these issues of insidious undermining of liberty and the imposition of undemocratic things.
Brilliant, thanks.
Yeah, on referendums, democracy has got two dimensions, the representative side and the majoritarian side. At the moment, the majoritarian side of democracy barely exists. Everything is done through representatives, everything is done through secondary institutions, and you have what's called insulated democracy, where the powers that be are insulated from popular aspirations and popular pressures. Now, where referendums are useful, particularly useful is in local communities where the majoritarian principle needs to prevail, because we're discussing things that directly matter to us here in that particular community. So the more referendums you have within the local communities, the better. And I think also we need to kind of bend the stick a little bit more away from the present way that things are run and introduce referendums, particularly on those kinds of issues that affect people's lives, that that kind of affect the family, that affects people's health. We need to have a much more direct say in relation to that. Unfortunately, because we don't live in Rome or ancient Athens, we cannot just simply rely on direct democracy, so we need to have a form of representation as well. And I think the really creative challenge is how you get that balance right. And it seems to me that the more we're able to educate ourselves as citizens, the more we're able to come up with solutions whereby representation can lose some of its alienating and dominating character. So it's that balance, I think, that is really quite important for us to figure out.
Okay, thanks. Listen, can we just thank them both? That was bloody brilliant. So.